The morning sun filtered through the crystalline viewing ports of the Galactic Education Consortium's flagship academy, casting rainbow patterns across the polished floors where students from dozens of species hurried to their xenobiology classes. Professor Zethkree adjusted her cooling vest with one of her 6 arms while reviewing the day's lesson plan on her datapad. Today would be special. Today, her students would meet their first apex predator. The Veltar educator had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Her species, like most in the consortium, had evolved from prey animals. Their large eyes could detect movement from nearly any angle, their sensitive hearing could pick up the slightest sound of approaching danger, and their powerful legs could carry them to safety faster than most land-based threats could follow. The very concept of a creature that hunted other intelligent beings was both fascinating and terrifying to her students. "Remember, class," Zethkree announced to the 23 assembled beings as they settled into their biosafe learning pods, "today's subject is extremely dangerous. The containment field has been triple-checked by the Academy's safety board and emergency protocols are in place." Her voice carried the slight tremor that all Veltar experienced when discussing predators, an evolutionary response hardwired into their genetic code. Pipka, a young fluffin whose species resembled oversized rabbits with opposable thumbs, raised a trembling paw. "Professor, are you certain the containment will hold? My podfather says that predators can sense fear through electromagnetic fields and that they become more violent when they smell prey animals." Several other students shifted nervously in their pods. The Zeni twins, crystalline beings who communicated through harmonic resonances, began producing the high-pitched whine that indicated extreme anxiety. Even the typically bold Korthok student, whose rocky hide made them nearly indestructible, had retreated further into their shell. "The containment field is completely secure," Zethkree assured them, though she made a note to increase the power output by another 15%. "The specimen has been sedated and will remain in a dormant state throughout our observation period. We will simply observe its physical characteristics and discuss its hunting adaptations from a safe distance." The delivery team had arrived early that morning. 3 heavily armed consortium security officers in full combat gear, their faces hidden behind blast-resistant visors. They had wheeled in a massive containment unit that hummed with power, its opaque walls preventing any glimpse of what lay within. The lead officer, a scarred veteran of the border conflicts, had personally verified the locking mechanisms twice before handing over the activation codes. "Attention, students," Zethkree announced, her finger hovering over the transparency control. "I am now revealing the apex predator specimen. Please remain calm and observe its physiological adaptations for hunting and killing." The containment unit's walls shifted from opaque to clear, revealing the creature within. Zethkree had studied the files extensively, but seeing it in person still sent chills through her exoskeleton. The being stood roughly 2 meters tall, with pale pink skin stretched over what appeared to be dense muscle and bone. Its eyes faced forward, a clear predator trait that allowed for precise depth perception when stalking prey. The mouth contained rows of sharp white teeth obviously designed for tearing flesh. Its hands ended in blunt digits, but Zethkree knew from her research that these could manipulate tools with deadly precision. But something was wrong. Instead of lying dormant as expected, the creature was upright and alert. Its forward-facing eyes were moving, taking in its surroundings with an intelligence that made Zethkree's skin crawl. Most disturbing of all, the corners of its mouth were turned upward in what her xenobiology training identified as a threat display. "Professor," whispered Lixara, a moth-yi whose wings were fluttering with nervous energy, "it appears to be conscious. Should we evacuate?" Before Zethkree could respond, the impossible happened. The predator spoke. "Well, this is new," the creature said, its voice surprisingly calm and melodious. "I have to admit, being called a specimen is a first for me." The classroom erupted in chaos. Half the students immediately triggered their emergency pod's lockdown protocols, sealing themselves behind additional barriers. The Zenni twins' harmonic whining reached frequencies that shattered 2 data tablets. Pipka fainted outright, her unconscious form sliding to the floor of her pod with a soft thump. Zethkri's training kicked in as she reached for the emergency alarm, but the Predator's next words stopped her cold. Hey, nobody panic," the creature said, raising its hands in what appeared to be a calming gesture. "I'm Marcus Chen, exchange student from Earth. I think there's been a pretty serious misunderstanding here." "Impossible," Zethkri breathed, though she found her hand moving away from the alarm. "The requisition clearly stated we were receiving an apex predator specimen for educational purposes." Marcus laughed, actually laughed, a sound that sent several more students diving for cover. "Oh, that's rich. Let me guess. Someone in the Cultural Exchange Office thought it would be funny to classify humans as predator specimens. I'm going to have some words with them when I get out of here." You are not sedated," Zethkri observed, stating the obvious while her mind struggled to process this development. "Sedated? No, definitely not sedated. Though I did have some amazing coffee this morning that might explain why I'm so alert." Marcus looked around the classroom with genuine curiosity. "This is actually pretty cool. I've never been the subject of a xenobiology class before. Mind if I ask what you were planning to observe?" The question was so casual, so utterly lacking in the violent aggression Zethkri had been taught to expect from apex predators that she found herself answering automatically. "We were studying predator adaptations. Your forward-facing eyes for depth perception during hunting, your dental structure for processing flesh, your tool manipulation capabilities for creating weapons." "Ah," Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, I can see how that might look pretty intimidating from an evolutionary perspective, though I have to point out that these forward-facing eyes are also pretty great for reading books, watching movies, and appreciating art. The teeth handle vegetables just as well as meat. Better, actually, since I'm mostly vegetarian. And the hands," he wiggled his fingers demonstratively, "are mainly used for typing, playing musical instruments, and giving really good hugs." Lixara had been listening intently despite her fear, and her scientific curiosity began to override her prey instincts. You do not hunt other sapient beings?" "Hunt other sapient beings?" Marcus looked genuinely shocked. "Absolutely not. That would be murder, which is illegal and completely immoral by human standards. We've spent thousands of years developing ethical frameworks specifically to protect intelligent life." This declaration caused a stir among the students who were brave enough to remain listening. The concept of a predator with ethics was something their textbooks had never covered. "But your species classification clearly indicates apex predator status," Zethkri protested, pulling up her files. "Earth mammals, dominant species, tool users, pack hunters, territorial behavior." "Well, technically true," Marcus admitted, "but you're missing a lot of context. Yes, humans historically hunted for survival, and yes, we can be territorial when threatened, but we also developed agriculture about 12,000 years ago, which pretty much eliminated the need for hunting as a primary food source. Most humans today get their nutrition from cultivated plants and ethically raised livestock." "Livestock?" The word was unfamiliar to most of the class. "Animals we raise specifically for food, but treat humanely during their lives. It's actually a pretty complex ethical discussion in human society. Lots of people choose not to eat animals at all because they believe it's wrong. We're constantly debating how to balance nutrition, ethics, and environmental concerns." The Korthax students slowly emerged from their shell, their rocky features betraying curiosity. "Your species debates ethics regarding food sources?" "Oh, constantly," Marcus said with another laugh. You should see the arguments about synthetic versus organic vegetables, or whether lab-grown meat counts as vegetarian. We've got entire philosophical movements dedicated to these questions. Zethkri felt her world view shifting in uncomfortable ways. Everything in her education had taught her that predators were driven by instinct, that they killed without remorse or consideration. The idea of a predator species that voluntarily restricted its own hunting behavior for ethical reasons was revolutionary. "May I ask," she said carefully, "why you are here at the Academy, if not as a research specimen?" Marcus's expression brightened considerably. "I'm actually here to study comparative literature. Earth got accepted into the consortium about 6 months ago, and I was selected for the cultural exchange program. I'm particularly interested in how different species express concepts of heroism and sacrifice in their storytelling traditions." The irony was not lost on any of them. Here was an apex predator who had come to study stories about heroes, beings who protected others from danger. "Your species produces literature?" asked Pipka, who had regained consciousness and was listening from the safety of her pod. "Oh, tons of it. Poetry, novels, plays, songs, movies. Humans are incredibly creative when it comes to storytelling. We've been doing it since we developed language. Some of our oldest stories are about protecting the innocent and standing up to tyranny. But..." Zethkri struggled with the cognitive dissonance. "You are predators. How do you have stories about protection and heroism?" Marcus considered this for a moment, his expression growing more serious. "I think maybe that's exactly why we have those stories. See, humans are aware that we have the capacity for violence. We know we're physically capable of causing harm, but rather than just accepting that as our nature, we decided we wanted to be better than our instincts." He gestured around the room, taking in all the cowering students. "Look, I understand why you're afraid. Your evolutionary background makes perfect sense from a survival perspective. But humans learned a long time ago that just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. Our stories, our laws, our social structures, they're all designed to channel our capabilities toward protecting rather than predating. This is..." Zethkri paused, searching for words. "This is not what our xenobiology texts describe. Your texts are probably focused on biological capabilities rather than cultural evolution," Marcus suggested. "It's like studying a Veltar's leg muscles and concluding that your species does nothing but run away from threats, when actually you've built one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy." The comparison hit home. Zethkri had always been frustrated by biological reductionism in academic discussions of her own species. The idea that the same oversimplification might apply to humans had never occurred to her. "Could you," she asked hesitantly, "could you tell us more about human cultural evolution?" "For educational purposes?" Marcus grinned, an expression that no longer seemed quite so threatening. "I'd love to. But maybe we could do this with the containment field turned off. It's getting a bit stuffy in here, and I promise I'm house-trained." The joke fell flat as most species present didn't understand the reference. But the request sparked a new debate. Several students immediately protested, while others seemed curious about the possibility of closer observation. "The safety protocols," Zethkri began. "I understand your concerns," Marcus said gently. "What if I stay in the center of the room and everyone keeps their emergency protocols ready? If I make any sudden movements, you can lock everything down. But I think this conversation would be more productive without barriers between us." It was a reasonable request, but it went against every instinct Zethkri possessed. On the other hand, the creature, Marcus, she corrected herself, had been completely peaceful so far. His behavior contradicted everything she knew about apex predators. "I will need to contact the administration," she decided. "This situation is far beyond normal protocols." "Totally understandable," Marcus agreed. "While you're doing that, Maybe I could answer questions from the students. I promise to stay right here in the center. The next hour passed in the most educational chaos Zethkri had ever experienced. Once word spread through the Academy's communication networks, students and faculty from other classes began arriving to observe the unprecedented event. The hallway outside filled with beings who had never seen a living predator, much less spoken with one. Marcus fielded questions with patience and good humor, explaining human history, culture, and biology in terms his audience could understand. He talked about human art forms, from ancient cave paintings to modern holographic installations. He described human music, actually singing a few examples that left the Zenni twins humming along in harmony. He discussed human philosophy, ethics, and even their methods for conflict resolution. Most shocking of all, when asked about human military capabilities, Marcus answered honestly about their weapons and tactics, but emphasized how these were used primarily for defense and peacekeeping rather than conquest. Humans actually prefer diplomacy to warfare, he explained to a rapt audience that now filled half the auditorium. We have an entire class of professionals called diplomats whose job is to solve problems without fighting. War is considered a last resort, and even then, we have extensive rules about protecting civilians and minimizing casualties. The questions continued until Academy Director Ralesh arrived with a full security detail. The elderly Mel-Ani's tentacles were twisted with anxiety as she surveyed the scene. A supposed apex predator standing calmly in the center of a crowd of prey species engaged in animated discussion about comparative poetry. Professor Zethkri, the director said in carefully controlled tones, please explain why the predator specimen is not contained and sedated as per safety protocols. Director, Zethkri replied, her voice stronger than she felt. I believe there has been a significant classification error. This individual is not a specimen at all, but rather a cultural exchange student who was mistakenly processed as research material. Director Ralesh's primary eyes focused on Marcus, while her secondary eyes kept watch on the crowd. You are claiming this apex predator is a student? Marcus Chen, Earth Cultural Exchange Program, Marcus said, offering what appeared to be a respectful bow. I have my documentation if you'd like to verify my status, though I have to say this has been the most interesting first day of classes I've ever had. The director's tentacles coiled tighter as she processed this information. Behind her, the security team maintained ready positions, their weapons trained on Marcus, despite his calm demeanor. Even if this is true, she said finally, you are still classified as an extremely dangerous apex predator. Academy policy requires special containment for all beings above threat level 7. With respect, Director, Marcus replied, I'd like to challenge that classification. I believe it's based on incomplete information about human civilization. And with those words, the real education was about to begin. The emergency session of the Academy Review Board convened 3 hours later in the main administrative chamber, a circular room designed to accommodate beings of vastly different physiologies. Director Ralesh occupied the central platform, her tentacles working nervously as she reviewed the unprecedented situation before them. Arrayed around the room were representatives from 12 different species, each more bewildered than the last by the morning's events. Marcus sat in what had originally been designed as a containment chair but had been modified at his polite request to be more comfortable. The energy restraints remained in place, though he seemed more amused than concerned by them. To his left, Professor Zethkri clutched her datapad containing hours of recorded testimony from students who had interacted with the supposed predator. Let the record show, Director Ralesh began formally, that we are here to review the threat classification of human specimen designation HC0001, currently identified as Marcus Chen of the planet Earth. Actually, interrupted Counselor Vexry, the Academy's head of student affairs, if his documentation is legitimate, He should be addressed as Student Chen, not as a specimen. The subtle correction sparked immediate debate among the board members. Dr. Ira Fen-Cole, whose species had evolved from burrowing creatures with an instinctual fear of surface predators, vibrated his disagreement through the floor. Documentation can be forged. The biological evidence is clear. Forward-facing eyes, carnivorous dental structure, manipulator appendages designed for tool use. These are textbook predator characteristics. With respect, Dr. Fen-Cole, Marcus interjected politely, I'd like to address those assumptions, if I may. The room fell silent. Several board members had never heard a predator speak before, and the casual way Marcus requested permission to participate in the discussion was completely contrary to their expectations of violent, instinct-driven behavior. Proceed, Director Ralesh said cautiously. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his posture non-threatening but engaged. First, about the forward-facing eyes. Yes, they provide excellent depth perception, which was useful for hunting in our species' past. But they're also essential for activities that define modern human civilization. Artists need depth perception to create three-dimensional works. Surgeons need it to perform precise medical procedures. Engineers need it to build complex structures. Our eyes aren't just predator tools. They're instruments of creation and healing. Dr. Fen-Cole's vibrations increased in frequency, indicating skepticism. Tool manipulation capabilities remain a threat regardless of application. True, Marcus agreed easily. But consider this. These same hands that could theoretically wield weapons are also used by human mothers to comfort crying children, by musicians to create beautiful symphonies, by teachers to help students learn. The capability for violence exists, but it's overwhelmed by our capacity for gentleness. Board member Lithara, a graceful being whose species had evolved from tree-dwelling creatures, spoke up with curiosity overriding caution. You speak of mothers and children. Do human predators care for their young? Extensively, Marcus replied with visible emotion. Human parents typically spend 18 to 25 years raising each child, teaching them not just survival skills, but ethics, creativity, and empathy. We have extensive social structures designed to protect children who aren't even related to us. In fact, one of the gravest crimes in human society is harming a child, any child. This revelation sent ripples of confusion through the assembled beings. Every species present understood parental care, but the idea of predators extending protection to unrelated young was revolutionary. Counselor Vexry leaned forward with interest. You mentioned teaching ethics. Can you elaborate on human moral development? Marcus's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. Oh, that's a fascinating topic. Human children start learning about right and wrong almost as soon as they can communicate. We have countless stories, games, and traditions designed to teach concepts like fairness, kindness, and justice. By the time humans reach adulthood, they've been exposed to thousands of moral scenarios and have developed sophisticated ethical reasoning abilities. But surely, Dr. Fen-Cole interjected, these ethics are primarily designed to benefit your own species at the expense of others. Actually, no, Marcus said, shaking his head. Some of our most celebrated ethical frameworks specifically emphasize treating other species with respect and dignity. We have extensive conservation programs designed to protect non-human life, animal welfare laws that prohibit cruelty, and growing movements that advocate for the rights of artificial intelligences. Professor Zethkri, who had been reviewing her notes, spoke up. Student Chen, during our earlier discussion, you mentioned that humans voluntarily restrict their own hunting behavior. Could you explain how this developed historically? Certainly, Marcus replied, settling back in his chair. It's actually a perfect example of how humans can overcome their biological programming through cultural evolution. About 10,000 years ago, humans developed agriculture and animal husbandry, which provided more reliable food sources than hunting. This freed up time and energy for developing arts, sciences, and philosophy. He paused to gather his thoughts before continuing. As human societies became more complex, we began developing ethical frameworks that valued all life, not just human life. Many cultures developed concepts of compassion and mercy that explicitly protected the weak from the strong. We began to see restraint and protection as virtues rather than weaknesses. This is, Director Ralesh admitted, completely contrary to our understanding of predator psychology. I think maybe your understanding is based on non-sapient predators, Marcus suggested gently. The key difference is that humans developed the cognitive ability to examine our own instincts and decide whether to follow them or not. We became capable of choosing cooperation over competition, protection over predation. Board member Crickstall, whose crystalline form had been resonating with thoughtful harmonics throughout the discussion, finally spoke. If this is true, why does the Galactic Consortium database classify humans as apex predators? Marcus laughed, a sound that still made several board members flinch despite the context. I suspect whoever compiled that database looked at our biological capabilities and evolutionary history without considering our current cultural state. It's like classifying the Veltar as pure prey animals based on their ability to run fast, while ignoring the fact that they've built a spacefaring civilization. The comparison made Professor Zethkri nod vigorously. That is exactly the kind of reductionist thinking I've argued against in my own research. What concerns me, said Counselor Vexry, is the potential for deception. How do we know these claims about human civilization are accurate? An excellent question, Marcus replied. I'd suggest contacting Earth's consortium representative directly. Better yet, I can provide access to human cultural databases, historical records, and even real-time communications with Earth if you'd like verification. Director Ralesh's tentacles stopped their nervous writhing. You would voluntarily provide access to your species' data? Of course. Transparency builds trust, and trust is essential for peaceful cooperation. Besides, human culture is something we're proud of. We want to share it with others. The offer to voluntarily provide potentially sensitive information was so contrary to predator behavior that several board members began reconsidering their fundamental assumptions. Dr. Fencole, in particular, had stopped vibrating his disagreement and was now producing the low-frequency hums that indicated deep thought. Assuming for a moment that your claims are accurate, the burrowing species representative said slowly, how do we address the fear response your presence generates among prey species? That's a really important question, Marcus acknowledged. And I don't think the answer is to pretend that human evolutionary history doesn't exist. Instead, I'd suggest education and gradual exposure. Let people learn about human culture and values before they meet humans in person. Show them that we've chosen to be protectors rather than predators. You would accept being treated with suspicion? Asked Lithara with surprise. I'd accept being treated with caution, Marcus corrected. Suspicion implies distrust of our motives, while caution simply acknowledges our capabilities. I think caution is reasonable and responsible. Board member Kendar, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, finally spoke. Their species had evolved from creatures that lived in symbiosis with various predators, making them one of the few present who didn't have an instinctual fear response to Marcus. Student Chen, what would you propose as an appropriate classification for humans within consortium systems? Marcus considered the question carefully. I'd suggest something like protective predator or ethical apex species. Something that acknowledges our evolutionary heritage while recognizing our cultural development. The goal should be accuracy, not political correctness. Protective predator, Director Ralesh repeated thoughtfully. That would be a new classification category. Maybe it's time for new categories, Marcus suggested. The galaxy is a big place, And I suspect humanity isn't the only species that's transcended its evolutionary programming through cultural development. The discussion continued for another 2 hours, covering topics from human art and literature to their approaches to conflict resolution and their treatment of other species on Earth. Marcus patiently answered every question, provided detailed examples, and even offered to demonstrate human creative abilities by composing an impromptu poem about interspecies cooperation. The poem, while simple, had a profound effect on the board members. It spoke of different species working together, each contributing their unique strengths to solve common problems. Most importantly, it portrayed humanity not as conquerors, but as partners eager to learn from and collaborate with other forms of intelligence. As the session neared its conclusion, Director Raulesh called for preliminary opinions from the board members. The responses revealed how much their perspectives had shifted over the course of the afternoon. "I maintain that humans possess dangerous capabilities," Dr. Fencole admitted. "But I no longer believe they represent a threat to peaceful species. If anything, their commitment to ethical behavior suggests they could be valuable allies." Counselor Vexry nodded agreement. "The educational value of this interaction has been extraordinary. I believe we should consider establishing formal cultural exchange protocols with Earth." Even the most cautious members were beginning to see possibilities rather than just threats. Board member Yilin, whose species had been nearly driven extinct by predators in their evolutionary past, spoke with careful but genuine interest. "If humans truly have developed methods for controlling predatory instincts through cultural programming, this knowledge could be invaluable for the entire consortium." "Are you suggesting," Director Raulesh asked, "that we could learn from them?" "I'm suggesting," Yilin replied, "that a species which has successfully channeled predatory capabilities toward protection and cooperation might have insights that could benefit all of us." Marcus had been listening to this exchange with growing excitement. "Actually, that's exactly why I wanted to study comparative literature here. Humans have always learned our most important lessons from stories, tales of heroes who chose to protect rather than prey upon others, myths about cooperation, overcoming conflict, legends of those who used their strength in service of justice rather than domination." He gestured around the room, taking in all the diverse beings present. "Every species here probably has similar stories, tales that shaped your own cultural values. By studying them together, we might discover universal principles that could help all of us become better than our evolutionary programming intended." The suggestion that different species could learn from each other's wisdom, traditions struck a chord with the assembled beings. For the first time since the session began, the room buzzed with excitement rather than fear. "Student Chen," Director Raulesh said formally, "pending final verification of your documentation and cultural claims, this board is prepared to recommend your reclassification from apex predator specimen to cultural exchange student with special monitoring status." "What does special monitoring status entail?" Marcus asked. "Regular check-ins with counseling staff, cultural sensitivity training for your fellow students, and the opportunity to serve as a bridge between humanity and the rest of the consortium," Counselor Vexry explained. "You would essentially become our first case study in successful predator integration." Marcus grinned broadly. "I'd be honored. Though I should warn you, once word gets back to Earth that the galaxy is ready for cultural exchange, you're going to have a lot more humans wanting to visit. We're a pretty curious species." "That," said Director Raulesh with what might have been the Melani equivalent of a smile, "is a challenge we look forward to facing." 6 months later, the Galactic Education Consortium's flagship academy had become the most sought-after institution in 3 sectors, and Marcus Chen had become the most famous student in consortium history. The cultural exchange program that had begun with a case of mistaken identity had evolved into something extraordinary that was reshaping interspecies relations across the galaxy. Marcus stood before a packed auditorium, addressing an audience of over 3,000 beings from 47 different species. What had started as a simple literature class had grown into a revolutionary new field of study: applied interspecies cooperation theory. The irony that this field had been founded by the first predator species to join the consortium was lost on no one. Today's topic, Marcus announced to the eager audience, is the concept of courage in different cultural contexts. His voice was now transmitted through universal translators to accommodate species with different auditory ranges, and his image was displayed on screens positioned throughout the massive hall. In the front row, Professor Zethkri sat with her original xenobiology students, all of whom had become celebrities in their own right as the first beings to successfully interact with a human. Pipka had overcome her initial terror so completely that she was now working on her doctoral thesis about overcoming evolutionary fear responses through education. The Zeni twins had composed a harmonic symphony called First Contact that was being performed on worlds throughout the consortium. Human stories often focus on heroes who protect others despite personal risk, Marcus continued, clicking to a holographic display showing images from Earth literature. But I've learned that every species here has similar concepts expressed in different ways. The Veltar have their fast runners, individuals who deliberately draw predators away from their communities. The Korthak tell stories of Stonehearts who absorb damage to protect those behind them. The audience listened with rapt attention as Marcus wove together heroic traditions from dozens of cultures, showing how the same basic values appeared across species that had never had contact until joining the consortium. What made his presentations unique was his perspective as a predator who had chosen to study protection rather than practice hunting. The interesting thing, Marcus said, is that courage seems to be universal, but each species expresses it through their natural strengths. Prey species show courage by standing their ground when every instinct tells them to flee. Predator species show courage by restraining their power when they could easily dominate. A ripple of understanding passed through the audience. This was why Marcus's teachings resonated so powerfully. He offered a framework where every species could be heroic in their own way, rather than forcing them to adopt foreign concepts of bravery. During the question period, a young Fluffin student raised her paw. Marcus recognized her immediately as Tikra, one of Pipka's younger siblings who had enrolled specifically to study with the famous human. "Professor Chen," she asked in a clear voice that would have been impossible for her species to produce in the presence of a predator just months earlier, "how does human courage compare to the courage shown by prey species?" "That's a brilliant question, Tikra," Marcus replied, genuinely pleased. "I'd argue that prey species actually demonstrate a more impressive form of courage than humans do. When a human protects someone, we're using our natural advantages. When a fluffin like your sister Pipka chooses to stay and help others instead of running, she's actively overriding millions of years of evolutionary programming. That takes extraordinary mental strength." The answer brought a standing ovation from the Fluffin section and approving sounds from species throughout the auditorium. Marcus had become famous not just for bridging cultural gaps, but for his ability to make every species feel valued and respected. After the lecture, Marcus walked across the campus that had become his second home. The academy had undergone massive changes since his arrival. New dormitories had been constructed to accommodate the flood of applications from species who wanted to study interspecies relations. The cafeteria now served foods from 47 different worlds, with special attention paid to dietary restrictions and cultural taboos. Most remarkably, the fear-based architecture that had originally been designed to protect prey species from potential predators had been gradually replaced with open, collaborative spaces that encouraged interaction between different types of beings. The containment classroom, where Marcus had first been displayed like a zoo exhibit, was now a memorial to the day understanding began, complete with a plaque that read, "Here, fear was transformed into friendship through the courage to listen." Marcus's destination was the new Predator Integration Center, a facility that had been constructed to help other apex predator species navigate the complex process of joining the consortium. 3 more species had applied for membership since humanity's successful integration, and Marcus had been asked to serve as a consultant for their cultural evaluation processes. Inside the center, he found Director Ralesh reviewing applications with Dr. Sarah Thompson, Earth's newly appointed interspecies cultural liaison. Dr. Thompson had arrived 2 months earlier as part of a formal embassy delegation, and her expertise in anthropology and psychology had proven invaluable in developing integration protocols. "Marcus," Director Ralesh greeted him warmly, her tentacles now displaying the relaxed patterns that indicated genuine friendship rather than professional courtesy. "Perfect timing. We're reviewing the application from the Kethmori Empire." "The pack hunters from the Outer Rim?" Marcus asked, settling into a chair that had been specially designed for human anatomy. "What's their cultural situation?" Dr. Thompson pulled up a holographic display showing a species that looked remarkably like Earth's extinct dire wolves, but with opposable thumbs and complex technological achievements. "Highly intelligent, tool-using, socially organized," she read from the file. "But their society is still based on dominance hierarchies and territorial expansion. Think of ancient Earth civilizations that glorified conquest." "So they haven't made the cultural leap that humans did," Marcus observed. "Are they coachable?" "That's what we need to determine," Director Ralesh replied. "Their ambassador is arriving next week for preliminary discussions. We're hoping you might be willing to participate in the evaluation process." Marcus considered the request carefully. Since his integration, he had helped establish protocols for predator species evaluation, but the Kethmori would be the first truly aggressive culture to apply for consortium membership. The stakes were much higher than they had been with humanity's peaceful, if physically intimidating, application. "I'm willing," he decided, "but I think we need to be very careful about our approach. If they're still operating on dominance-based thinking, they might interpret friendliness as weakness or submission." "What do you recommend?" Dr. Thompson asked. "We need to demonstrate strength and cooperation simultaneously," Marcus replied. "Show them that choosing restraint isn't the same as being weak. Maybe arrange for them to observe some of our joint military exercises with the consortium defense forces." The suggestion surprised both Director Ralesh and Dr. Thompson. The consortium defense forces were primarily composed of defensive specialists and technological warfare experts, with humans providing the only significant ground combat capabilities. The integration of human military tactics with consortium defensive strategies had created the most effective peacekeeping force in galactic history. "You want to show them our military cooperation?" Director Ralesh asked. "I want to show them that predators can use their abilities to protect rather than conquer," Marcus clarified. "The defense forces are a perfect example of channeling aggressive capabilities toward protective purposes. If the Kethmori are truly honor-based, they might respect strength used in service of justice." Over the following week, Marcus worked with the Academy's cultural development team to design a comprehensive evaluation program for the Kethmori delegation. The program would expose them to multiple examples of cooperative strength, ethical decision-making, and protective behavior across different species. The centerpiece would be a joint exercise involving human ground forces, Veltar rapid response teams, Korthak defensive specialists, and Zenni coordination units working together to resolve a simulated crisis scenario. The exercise would demonstrate how different species could combine their natural abilities to achieve goals that none could accomplish alone. When the Kethmori ship arrived, Marcus was among the delegation that greeted them at the orbital platform. The pack hunters were impressive beings, larger than humans, with obvious physical power and the confident bearing of a species accustomed to dominance. Their leader, Ambassador Kethvor, examined the greeting party with obvious calculation. "You are the human," Kethvor stated upon seeing Marcus, his voice carrying what sounded like challenge. "I am," Marcus replied calmly, meeting the ambassador's gaze without aggression but also without submission. "Welcome to the Consortium Academy, Ambassador Kethvor." The exchange was watched carefully by all present. How these two apex predator species interacted would set the tone for everything that followed. Kethvor circled Marcus slowly, a behavior that would have terrified most prey species, but which Marcus recognized as an assessment rather than a threat. After completing his circuit, the ambassador spoke again. "You are smaller than expected for a species classified as apex predators." "Size isn't everything," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "Would you like to see what human strength actually looks like in practice?" The challenge was subtle but clear, and Kethvor's ears pricked with interest. "Show me." What followed was the most watched demonstration in Consortium history. The joint military exercise that Marcus had helped design became a showcase of how predator capabilities could be channeled toward protection and cooperation. Human tactical flexibility combined with Veltar speed, Korthak resilience, and Zenni coordination to resolve a complex crisis scenario involving hostage rescue, disaster relief, and territorial dispute resolution. The Kethmori delegation observed in fascination as Marcus coordinated with beings they would have considered natural prey, not only treating them as equals, but deferring to their expertise in areas where their species' natural abilities were superior to human capabilities. "Remarkable," Kethvor admitted after the exercise concluded. "Your species maintains its predatory edge while serving others. This is unexpected. It's what strength looks like when it's guided by wisdom instead of instinct," Marcus explained. "Any predator can dominate weaker beings. It takes real power to choose protection over predation." The conversation that followed lasted for hours, with Kethvor and his delegation asking detailed questions about human cultural development, ethical frameworks, and the practical challenges of integrating predator capabilities with cooperative goals. Marcus found himself drawing on months of experience helping other species understand human psychology, but also learning about Kethmori honor codes and social structures. By the end of the week, something unprecedented had occurred. The Kethmori delegation requested permission to establish a permanent cultural study mission at the Academy, with the goal of developing their own integration protocols based on the human model. "Your species has achieved something we believed impossible," Kethvor told Marcus during their final meeting. "You have maintained your strength while choosing to serve rather than rule. We would learn this wisdom if you are willing to teach it." "I'm willing," Marcus replied, "but understand that this path requires giving up the idea of dominance for its own sake. Can your people accept being strong for others rather than strong over others?" Kethvor was quiet for a long moment before responding. "For the chance to join a community of mutual protection and shared knowledge? Yes, I believe we can." As Marcus watched the Kethmori ship depart with plans to return with a full cultural exchange delegation, he reflected on how much had changed since that morning when he had been mistaken for a laboratory specimen. The mistake had become the foundation for something extraordinary, a new model of interspecies cooperation that was spreading throughout the galaxy. Professor Zethkri joined him at the observation deck as the ship disappeared into hyperspace. "You realize," she said, "that what you've accomplished here will be studied for generations. You've proven that predator species can not only join peaceful civilizations, but actually strengthen them." Marcus smiled, remembering his first day when this same professor had been terrified to be in the same room with him. "I think we've all learned something important here. It's not about what evolution made us. It's about what we choose to become. Below them, the Academy campus buzzed with activity as students from dozens of species worked together on projects that would have been impossible before first contact. Prey species and predator species collaborated as equals, each contributing their unique strengths to common goals. The human Deathworlder, who had just laughed at being called a predator specimen, had become the architect of a new age of interspecies cooperation. And somewhere in the galaxy, other species were watching, learning, and beginning to believe that they, too, could choose to be better than their evolutionary programming intended. The revolution that had begun with a simple case of mistaken identity continued to spread, one convert at a time, proving that the greatest predators were those who chose to protect rather than prey upon the galaxy around them.